Hey everybody, I'm Ethan James with thehonestcarpenter.com. About 20 videos ago, I showed some footage of myself using a large screwdriver to tear out parts of a door jamb or door casing. And at the time, I also referred to this thing as a demolition screwdriver. I was amazed by the number of comments I got down in my comment section from people writing in to say, what kind of carpenter uses a screwdriver when they should be using a chisel? And people seem to take exception with the fact that I referred to it as a demolition screwdriver. I wanted to make a video on the topic to clear up this subject because I actually think it's kind of an important one. When I was growing up on construction sites back in the 90s, literally every carpenter I knew had and used one of these, and I think for DIYers in particular, this can be an indispensable tool to have. So in this video, I'm going to compare big screwdrivers or demolition screwdrivers and chisels. Let me start by saying that I'm not running down the use of chisels. I actually keep 2 chisels on me at all times when I'm on the job site. They ride in a molded plastic case down here in my tool belt, and these little cases typically come with Occidental tool belts like the one I wear. That said, I don't use chisels all that often. I'm a professional carpenter. Professional woodworkers or even hobby woodworkers use chisels every day. And it probably comes down to the fact that a chisel is used more for fine work than rough work. And that's why I keep 2 of them. This is the chisel that I use for demolition, and it basically doesn't matter what happens to it. I consider it somewhat expendable. This is the chisel that I keep for somewhat finer work because I try to keep the point sharper, and I try to avoid bringing it into contact with metal or concrete. Chisels are mostly used for paring away layers of wood, carving wood, or just shaving off wood surfaces. They can also be used to cut directly through wood, which is something you'd do if you were, say, cutting a mortise for a door hinge. But, in my opinion, they're not much of a demolition tool for one reason: durability. Chisels get all their function from maintaining a very sharp edge. That sharp edge is what gives them cutting power. When they lose that sharp edge or it gets chipped or mangled, the function of the chisel drops drastically. Woodworkers, therefore, are obsessive about keeping their chisels sharp. But carpenters who work out in the field, on job sites, and come in contact with a lot of different materials don't always have that option. We can't constantly be sharpening our chisels every day like woodworkers are because ours are guaranteed to get busted up a little bit more on the job site. That's why I don't use my chisel very much for demolition purposes. Instead, I turn to the big screwdriver. It is basically impossible to damage this thing. I've tried over the years to do every horrible thing I could to it, and despite the fact I've had this one for 10 years, it remains pretty much like it was when I bought it, just a little bit uglier. Part of it is that the tip is much narrower, blunter to begin with, and it doesn't rely on having a sharp edge because this is more of a force tool. It gets pounded in with a hammer or even like a maul or a mini sledgehammer when I need to create a lot of force. I've never hit it with enough force to bend it or really cause any change to the structure of it. Handles or some sort of epoxy or resin, again, over time I've hit it even with the claw of my hammer before, and other than a few little chips and gouges, I just haven't changed it that much. I thought I would have broken this thing by now, but it hasn't occurred. On the other hand, I've completely broken off parts of the bevel on my chisels before, and I've even snapped them at the neck, down here where the tang goes into the handle. Chisels should really only be hit on the end of the tool. They should never really be struck from the side with too much force, and I don't know what you do it for anyways except to try to pry up some wood. DeWalt makes a chisel that has a cutting edge on one side and kind of a hammer edge up on the top, but other than that, pretty much every chisel you're going to get is meant to go straight into wood and perhaps pry a little bit. Demo screwdrivers, on the other hand, can be struck from any direction, any way you like, and can be driven in with tremendous amounts of force into multiple types of material. I use these things obviously to break out wood like you see me doing in the door jamb video, but I also use them sometimes to chip masonry, bricks, concrete, any number of things. So durability is what makes this possibly the best demolition tool that I have. But they're superior to chisels for demolition for another reason: leverage. Just compare the lengths of the 2 tools. My chisel is about 7 inches long. My demolition screwdriver is 10 inches long. You're getting 3 extra inches of leverage back here on the handle. This makes a big difference when you're having to pry out lots of material, or especially when you're trying to pull 2 components away from each other. A lot of the time I'm not using this to necessarily gouge out or change the shape of wood. I'm using it to break apart components that have been nailed or possibly even screwed together. In some cases, I know that those components aren't going to come apart, and the best thing for me to do is actually break or obliterate those components around the fasteners. You probably saw me doing this in my how to replace deck stair tread video, because a lot of times when I'm pulling up stair treads on a deck outside, I don't bother trying to pry them up because I'm too afraid of busting the stringers underneath. Instead, I just break the wood so that it separates around the fastener and you can just pull the components away. I would never reach for a chisel to do that because, again, this thing creates so much more leverage. It's also what I was doing in that door jamb video. People kept saying, why don't you use your oscillating tool to cut out that part? Or why don't you use a chisel to break it out? Because, again, it would take longer with both. Oscillating tools, though great, aren't that fast at cutting. And chisels, also great, can't create the sort of pressure inside that piece to crack the components apart. So you're not going to have to fight nearly as hard to get this thing to break or remove components or tear up a lot of wood. So they create more leverage, they're far more durable, and I think they actually have far more functions. You can multitask with this tool way more than you can with the chisel. If I want to find out how tightly connected two components are, I'll sometimes just work the screwdriver in very gently and pry very gently, and I can just tell. It's almost like an extension of your hand. I can tell how tight the fasteners are that are holding those two things together, and I know how much force ultimately I'm going to have to bring to bear to get them separated. So I'll often start a demolition with this tool, and it helps me understand what it's going to take to finish the demolition. I also use it to do what I call transferring force. In some cases, a fastener will be lodged back in a place that I can't get another tool, I can't hit it with a hammer, I can't back it out with the claw of a hammer. I can set the tip of this tool back in that recess on top of that fastener, strike this thing hard as can be with a hammer, and I'll transfer that force onto that fastener, either breaking it or deforming it enough that it'll let go. Other situations, if you have a nail head that's slightly exposed and it's in an area where you can no longer get your hammer in there to drive it down, you can set the flat face of this tool into that recessed area right on top of the nail head, and though it's somewhat difficult, strike down on this screwdriver and it can essentially act as the hammer head to drive another fastener in just a little bit if you can't get to it any other way. As I said, when I was younger, every carpenter I knew kept one of these on them at all times. And over the years, companies like Klein and Irwin have eventually realized that carpenters, for the most part, are only using these tools for demolition, and they've begun packaging and promoting some of their screwdrivers as demolition screwdrivers. That's their primary function, though yes, they can also be used to turn screws if that's what you need it for. And ultimately, the best thing about them is that they're just not that expensive. Your average one will run you somewhere between $10 and $20. I can't remember how much this one was because I bought it so long ago. I'm not going to link any down below because I can't find the one that I use on Amazon. This is a Cobalt, and Cobalt is typically Lowe's brand. But go into any big box store, go into the tool department, specifically the hand tool section, you're going to find these in with all the other screwdrivers. They also make a 12-inch one. Personally, I think that's a little too big to ride around conveniently in your tool belt. But if you have a lot of heavy demolition to do, it can't hurt to have a 10-inch and a 12-inch. So just wanted to clear that up a little bit. If you got any questions about this tool or anything I brought up in the video, please put it down in the comments section. Do you use these? Do you use them for anything that I don't use it for that I didn't mention? Let me know. I might learn something from it. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check back in for new videos coming up soon. I'm Ethan James with TheHonestCarpenter.com. See you next time.